Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Agriculture Today. And now, a quick glimpse to the state of the winter wheat crop in Kansas. And the latest account from the USDA suggests that we've seen better wheat stands as we head into the spring green-up time. We'll get the observations now from our guest, Romulo Lollato, who's a wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension, as you know. Romulo, you've been out in the state recently. You've had a first-hand look at what's going on, and you say there is green-up beginning out there, which may or may not be such a good thing.
Hi, Eric. Yes, definitely. The crop has been rated by the USDA there in approximately 50% or so in poor to very poor conditions. And if we think of the Kansas wheat crop this year, what it has been through, right? Let's revisit the growing season this far.
Sure.
Back in October, we had quite a bit of precipitation for most of the state. And it's kind of hard to remember it right now, as dry as we've been since, but we had quite a bit of precipitation. So in many cases, there is some subsoil moisture, and we have good stands because of that precipitation. The problem is that the root zone is just not reaching that water. The weather has been so dry since planting that the topsoil is very dry. I've been out in several parts of the state, especially Sumner County, through all the way to Hutchinson there, up to Bellevue, and that seems to be the case, where generally there's a good stand out there. You dig those plants, the crown roots, they are maybe 1 inch developed only, so very, very little development of that crown root. And the water that is in the subsoil, it's about maybe 7 or 8 inches down. So there's a mismatch there between where the roots are and where the water is. So that's the main issue right now. The crop isn't reaching that water. If in cases where there is subsoil moisture, right, the crop is not reaching that moisture. Up to now, we have been cool. And if we look back in temperatures during January and February, we were below our historical average, many times up to about maybe even about 10 degrees or so below our average, depending on where in the state. So this has helped the crop slow down its pace now. If we think of the last 2 winters, they were actually much warmer than this one. So compared to the last 2 winters, the crop is at least more slow in development this year. That can be helpful because it's dry, so the crop is not using as much water now. You asked a little bit ago now about green up, and we have been taking measurements of first hollow stem development in Hutchinson, and there are some varieties, specifically some very early varieties, that are starting to green up. You can already see that head that is developed there. There's maybe a very, very tiny hollow stem starting to develop as well. So what that tells us is that the crop needs for water are going to increase. And that's where we can start having some more serious consequences of this drought, is when the crop increases the water demand now in the spring, and there's just no water there to help fulfill that demand.
Now, we need to point out we're at the very early edge of the first green up, that we're not far along at all, generally speaking. But if it doesn't rain, at least reasonably, in the next, 2 weeks or so, then this becomes an issue?
Well, I think that will depend also on temperatures, right? If temperatures turn out to be warmer than average from here on, maybe that rain would need to come slightly earlier. But I think that 2-week interval that you mentioned, I think is a reasonable interval. If it becomes warmer, maybe we need some rain before that. Unfortunately, there's not much on the forecast except for the eastern third of the state. But yeah, definitely within this 2-week interval, if temperatures remain cool, then 2-week might be a good interval there for us to really see the crop start to green up throughout the state. But right now, some of the fields in Sumner County were wanting to green up, a little bit of green up around Hutchinson as well, but really concentrated in South Central. As you go to Bellevue or North Central, not much green up, no green up at all actually going on in that region. So that's why I try to be positive. I try to stay on the positive side and think that, well, if we have some rain in these next couple of weeks or so, we might get the crop going and we might still have a good potential if conditions in the spring are favorable. Another thing that would be very beneficial from a rain in the next few days would be not only from a better crop development, of course, but also nitrogen. For producers who already apply their nitrogen in the fall, they have the nitrogen out for 4 months already, but they had no rain on top of that. For those producers who already applied nitrogen, or the ones that are waiting for, right, anxiously waiting to put out that spring nitrogen, that rainfall would definitely be helpful to put the nitrogen in the root zone as well.
And you raise a good question here. For those who didn't top dress their nitrogen by now, they may have doubts about whether that investment is going to be worthwhile given the uncertainty of the yield potential here. So that's a difficult call to make, isn't it, Romulo?
It is. It's a difficult call because, as you mentioned, a crop with a decreased yield potential, are we going to invest on that crop even more, right? Now, on the positive note, there's been some recent research done at Oklahoma State University where they were looking at how late they can postpone that nitrogen application and still be able to recover yield. And the data that they were showing from last year actually seems like they were seeing the deficiency of nitrogen early January, and they were able to wait on that application until March 20th or so and still recover yield completely as compared to just putting everything pre-plant.
That's quite late, it would seem. Yeah.
It is very late, and we were all impressed actually with those results. I think part of it has to do also with the weather pattern that we had last spring. So they were putting the nitrogen out, but we had quite a bit of precipitation to still allow for that potential to be recovered. So maybe it's not late. Well, for sure it's not late yet, right? Okay. But maybe we still have more time than we were actually thinking. That translates to maybe the first node as late as in between that first and second node. We could still get a very nice yield response if conditions are right. So if we put the nitrogen and we still have rainfall to put the nitrogen in the root zone. For producers who don't know whether to put out nitrogen or not, we have technology with active sensors. And those active sensors, they generally help us have an estimate of the yield potential in season and adjust our nitrogen rates accordingly. So I encourage producers to reach out to K-State Extension in your county, or even to myself or Dr. Azevedo as well, who's working a lot with sensor-based nitrogen management. And this might be a season that might be very advantageous because we don't know what the yield potential is. We can go ahead and we can estimate that using sensors and better manage our nitrogen. One of the things that has been very successful in Oklahoma as well is the use of nitrogen-rich strips, and that's very visual. So you'd go ahead and just put a very rich nitrogen strip in your field, and a few weeks later you can really tell the difference there, so you can have an idea of how much you're actually missing on yield potential. That's more of a visual aid, but that actually helps out quite a bit for us to see how much are we limiting our crop for nitrogen.
So some thoughts to consider there, but the main point seems to be producers, if you've held off on your top dressing, don't give up on it quite yet. You still have a few weeks of opportunity, if nothing else.
Definitely. I would be checking the forecast. As soon as we have a decent rain chance, I would probably go ahead and get it done right before that. And don't worry about being too late. Even if you're seeing nitrogen deficiency symptoms, as long as we are before jointing or in between that jointing and second node, we can still have an excellent recovery if we put the nitrogen and it is in the root zone within a few days due to rainfall.
All right. One quick word here in closing, Romulo, and that refers to something that you brought up earlier. You were checking fields in south central Kansas, you say, recently for first hollow stem as a stage of growth, and that is a signal for those who have cattle grazing wheat to remove those livestock from that wheat if they intend to go to grain. And there's an article on this in the recent E-Update newsletter that you'd invite producers to look at to give them more guidance on this.
Definitely, Eric. The article is out as of last Friday. We provide some guidelines there on how to look for the first hollow stem. These would apply for producers who are in a dual-purpose condition, so grazing now, and intend to go for yield, right? We have some thoughts there on best timing to remove cattle so we're not hurting your yield potential. We might see just many producers also maybe deciding to just graze it out this year right, if conditions continue to be poor. But if you're interested in going for grazing, make sure and check out that article. We are explaining what to look for, and basically is just go to areas in the field that are not grazed, so maybe just outside the fence. It needs to be field specific for that variety in that field because it really depends on temperature. Just pull a few whole plants, look for the main tiller, split it open lengthwise, and just see if you have approximately the diameter of a dime in between the crown level and the developing head. That's the optimal time to remove cattle. So you avoid some yield losses by grazing late.
That, again, is in the February 23rd Agronomy E-Update newsletter. Optimal time to remove cattle from wheat pasture using the first hollow stem evaluation. And Romulo, you'll be back on the road taking a look at wheat, and you'd invite producers to follow you on social media for the latest updates from the field, right?
Yes, Eric. So producers who are on social media, make sure and follow me at KSU Wheat, either on Twitter or Facebook. Again, at KSU Wheat.
Romulo, thank you for being by once again.
Thank you, Eric.
He's a wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. That's Romulo Lollato. On this, Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. Well, it's coming up very swiftly now. Tomorrow, March the 2nd, is the 2018 Cattlemen's Day at Kansas State University. We've been informing you about that here the last couple of weeks or so. And another of the featured topics at Cattlemen's Day within one of those breakout sessions is what we'll take up now as more or less a prelude to Cattlemen's Day. That is, can split time artificial insemination improve the profitability of the AI program? The presenter of that session is with us now via phone from Northwest Kansas, where she works as a K-State Research and Extension livestock specialist, Sandy Johnson. Well, timed AI has been a practice that has caught on with more than a few producers out there, and so you've been looking into the actual performance of those timed AI programs of late, you say, Sandy.
Yes, everybody wants to improve pregnancy rates to AI, and there's probably a realistic limit to what we can do there, but again, that's a goal that we're working on, and actually in trying to improve results to sex semen, probably got us started down the road we're going to talk about, and we know that fertility is reduced with sex semen compared to conventional semen anyway, so we have that challenge, and then secondly, we still like to be able to schedule our AI with synchronization protocol, and so that means that when we combine the reduced fertility of the semen, and that we'll never get 100% of everybody to respond to a synchronization program, the combination of those two with sex semen and fixed-timed AI got people looking at some different options, and really with any research we start with some basics. What do we know about animals that respond better and those that don't? And we're fortunate to have some tools now that help us gain some information that we used to gain with graduate students, but now we can use some of these scratch-off heat detection patches and really get a very effective assessment of the cows that are in heat. And in this case, we're putting patches on at the time a cedar is removed or prostaglandin is given, and probably both of those things happen. And so then when we come to our point to schedule fixed-timed AI, we can look at those patches and say, okay, this one's completely rubbed off, she's been in heat. And if we look at differences in pregnancy rate of those that have their patches scratched off at our planned fixed-timed AI and those that don't, in general, those with that cleaned-off patch, so they've been in heat, have a higher pregnancy rate than those that have not been in heat. And we know that our fixed-timed AI is really a trade-off of trying to find an optimal time, not too early for those that come in heat late, and not too late for those that come in heat early. So as they were looking at, what can we do with sex semen and our synchronization, they said, well, what if we just wait till the next day for those animals that have not shown heat at our normally scheduled fixed-timed AI and inseminate them then?
This is the split-timed approach, right?
Right. That would be the split time. So essentially delaying insemination on anything that hasn't shown heat at your normal time of fixed time insemination. And there's quite a number of variables there in terms of what protocol and how much time, and we don't want to get into that. But if we look at just the information on that using conventional semen, okay, does fixed-timed AI compared to split-timed AI improve overall pregnancy rates? And we don't have a lot of comparative data on that. Most of it has been looking at tweaking other things. But what we see is anywhere from no difference to maybe a 3% improvement. And statistically, we have to talk about some of those differences as trends. So, it's not a big wow effect, okay? There appears to be some. So from a practical standpoint, then a producer has to ask themselves, well, I'm getting pretty good results with, just my fixed-timed AI. Is it going to be worth it to me to sort off these cows that haven't shown heat yet and bring them back the next day? And how am I going to manage those calves? And, those are some realistic considerations. And, probably the value of your AI-sired calves would help you make that decision. One of the things that we have really collected more data on now, and I guess we told people this, but probably did not make a big point of it, was, anytime an animal is in heat, in a spring calving cow, her tail head may be raw, and we pretty much know that she's been ridden the last day or so, she's in heat. Well, anything like that, essentially we would not need to administer GnRH to induce ovulation at fixed-timed AI because she is already, by virtue of being in heat, has started that process already. And so if we use these heat detection patches, in effect, we can eliminate giving GnRH to anyone that has an activated patch. So there's a potential for a cost savings there depending on, exactly what you're paying for GnRH or patches and the potential number that it might save you. And I've got some data that I'll share on that, or in terms of a matrix of how that might fall out. But certainly a handy tool that we could use to reduce the need for some additional product. So that's a good benefit of some of the things we've looked at. And the benefit of the patch is that, sometimes as you're working a group of cows, you might forget to look at how raw her tail head or isn't, but maybe if we have a bright orange patch there, that reminds us, we don't need to do anything to this cow.
And that's going to be part of your message at Cattlemen's Day, how to read that information, so to say, from the patch.
Right. And it also gives us an opportunity, even if we're just breeding all in one day in a traditional fixed-timed AI and using that patch as an indicator, knowing that we're probably going to get slightly better results of those that have this activated patch or have been in heat, we could put higher value semen in those females versus those that don't. Maybe when we want to use some sex semen, we have some identified for certain cows that show heat at that time. So as we've looked at split-timed AI, it's really pointed out some of the advantages of these heat detection patches as a tool. And split-timed AI is an option. I think it's got to be a economic decision looking at the hassle factors and the potential gain in additional pregnancies. So very much an individual decision, not a blanket recommendation that I can give, but we'll try and share some of those data specifics more on Friday.
But to clarify, if a producer is truly interested in or even committed to using sexed semen, that might give a little more credence to the split-timed AI approach as opposed to regular semen?
Well, if I'm using sex semen, I don't want to put it in anything that I'm not really sure she's been in heat. That's the bottom line. And the results are very disappointing if she's not in heat. Okay, so because of the poor fertility anyway, because of the essentially stress to the cells during processing, it's too great a risk to try and put sex semen in a cow that you don't know that's been in heat. So the split-time AI allows you to see some more of those come in heat to use sex semen on. So, that's certainly an approach to consider for for sex semen, and I probably would still put conventional semen on those that have not shown any evidence of estrus and a non-activated patch.
As you invite producers into your session at Cattlemen's Day, you'd like them, Sandy, to bring questions about the economic payoff, if you will, of split-timed AI and whether, in fact, it would be a fit for their operation. That's the premise of the session, basically.
Right. Well, we'll review some of the data that we have and then kind of talk about what's that partial budget look like, what do we need to consider as we look at this as an option.
This is going to be one of several breakout sessions that take place during Cattlemen's Day, and you want to look for the session entitled Can Split-Time Insemination Improve Profit in Your AI Program? And those of you running AI and considering this, why, this would be a session to be sure to take in at Cattlemen's Day. And Sandy, you'll be around all day to talk these and any other cattle breeding program matters, will you not?
You bet. I'll be there all day and always enjoy visiting with people there, and I learn as much from them, I think, as they do from me. So I hope some people are there to teach me things.
We're looking forward to having you here in Manhattan come tomorrow for Cattlemen's Day 2018 at K-State, and likewise looking forward to your session on split-time AI. Appreciate your time right here, Sandy.
You bet. Glad to be there.
That's Sandy Johnson, livestock specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Again, she will be featured among many others at Cattlemen's Day at K-State. Be here for the registration around 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The program itself will get rolling around 10 o'clock in Weber Arena here on the campus. If you'd like to know more about the program, you can go to ksubeef.org. Still plenty of time to participate, but check out the particulars at ksubeef.org. You're tuned into Agriculture Today. Now, this break. When we come back, the K-State Horticulture segment for this week, still to come here on the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Closing out this Agriculture Today, our weekly K-State Horticulture segment, and a bit of a different bent this time around. Our guest is going to promote the idea of larger-scale fruit and vegetable production, and he believes that there's opportunity for you farmers to take advantage of the market possibilities there. Cary Rivard is with us, a fruit and vegetable production specialist, K-State Research and Extension. He's based in Olathe, northeast Kansas. We'll be talking with him in this segment both today and next Thursday as well. And Cary, straight out, why are you trumpeting this idea of our crop farmers out there giving produce production a look?
Yeah, well, we have such a great history in Kansas of agriculture, and one of the challenges it seems like we're having in row crops right now is financial sustainability and being able to make enough money with the market value of wheat and corn going down. So I think there's a lot of people that are interested in diversifying their farm as a way to help increase their financial sustainability and really develop some new enterprises within their farming system that can grow, generate some real revenue. And vegetables and fruits, you can really grow a high-value crop with only a small piece of land and using relatively small amounts of inputs compared to corn and beans and milo and some of those other things.
And it's worth noting there is community interest in locally sourced fruits and vegetables. That seems to be expanding in the state.
Absolutely. Local food is just growing by leaps and bounds all the time, and at the sort of county and town level, but also in the state through some of our wholesale growers that provide produce to some of the bigger cities like Wichita and Kansas City. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of growers tap into restaurants, and especially in sort of near populated areas, There's a lot of restaurants that are looking for local food all the time, and these chefs are really great at finding sort of niche crops or things that growers may have an abundance of at a certain time of year, and finding something really delicious that they can put on somebody's plate.
If you're looking at a smaller market or a farmer's market, say, something of that ilk, what would you think about in regard to crop selection?
So for people that are selling to direct consumers, those are going to be folks that are typically doing a lot more daily management, a lot more labor, getting produce to consumers right away, and it's going to be, quite frankly, a little bit more of a full-time job. And a lot of our growers that are using those markets are using high tunnels right now, which are basically unheated, passive solar greenhouses. Oftentimes they really look like just light-duty greenhouses or hoop houses where crops are grown directly in the soil underneath. And a lot of our growers in the area have great success with crops like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers. In the wintertime, you can grow really nice lettuce crops in high tunnels where you get that protection from the wind and that really challenging environment known as Kansas that can be kind of fun for vegetable growers.
For the larger markets now, and more directly for the wholesale market, other crops could be considered, and they may require actually less day-to-day intensive labor, you say.
Yeah, I think so. So, one of the things that we did in 2015 is K-State Research and Extension conducted a feasibility study. One of the things they found is that just within the wholesale market, and we're talking about large grocery stores, big produce movers like U.S. Foods and C&C and Cisco and some of those kinds of folks, there's about $150 million of unmet market demand in Kansas City alone. So these are all large-scale buyers that really want to buy local food, but they just don't have the volume that they need to get into some of these populated areas. So there's a lot of potential there for some of these wholesale markets, especially when you start talking about crops that we can grow in sort of larger scale here in Kansas. So some of those would be a lot of the cucurbit crops people do really well with. That includes pumpkins, melons and cantaloupe, honeydews, to some degree squash and butternut squash. You can grow those in pretty large acreages. They get harvested just a couple of times, so they still require quite a bit of labor, but you're not harvesting them every other day for 6 months long like you are with tomatoes. You can get in and out of a field, get it harvested, get it off the market. Similarly, sweet corn does really well here in Kansas, especially in the earlier part of the season before it gets, too hot. And the nice thing about sweet corn and to some degree green beans is that row crop farmers can use a lot of their current equipment that they're using to grow field corn and just start using sweet corn varieties and the management that goes along with that. Now, the biggest challenge with sweet corn is you have to get it right when it's ready to go, and you have to get it to market quickly and get it cool really fast so that it stays nice and sweet. But we do have some pretty large-scale sweet corn operations across the state that do that very successfully.
And there are still other large-scale vegetable production options here. One would be sweet potatoes, you say. Maybe onions could be fit into an operation, and even strawberries, perhaps.
Yeah, so, you may not actually know this, but the original Kansas Vegetable Growers Association was the Kansas Sweet Potato Growers Association. Kansas actually grew a lot of sweet potatoes, especially along the Cary River Valley, in parts of the states where we have some sandier soils. Sweet potatoes love hot weather. They don't require very much fertilizer. They basically have very few pests that come after them, so they're a nice crop to grow organically as well. And they really enjoy the climate that we struggle through here in Kansas. They like the heat and the drought that we have in the summer. And what's nice about them is you can store them and sell them throughout the course of the winter. For direct market people and for wholesalers, they can also do the same thing. And that crop is really just growing in market share by leaps and bounds all the time. Every restaurant, every store you go to now, you start seeing sweet potato fries and sweet potatoes integrated into people's menus. And there's some cool season crops, too, like you mentioned, some of the other storage crops, such as garlic and onions. Garlic and onions go really well here in the state. Garlic gets planted in the fall and harvested around the end of June. And similar, onions get planted about March 1st or March 15th, depending on what part of the state you're in. And you get those out of the ground before the end of June as well, too. So that way you're able to get some earlier income coming in. And again, trying to avoid that hottest part of the year when it's kind of challenging for those vegetables.
Well, Cary, there is more we want to get into on this subject of larger scale fruit and vegetable production, but our time's away for today. We'll have you back here next Thursday. Meantime, many thanks to you.
Thank you. It was great to be with you.
On this week's horticulture segment, K-State Research and Extension fruit and vegetable production specialist Cary Rivard. And indeed, that is our time for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.